Welcome to Interviews, the show about everyday people with extraordinary stories. I'm your host, Abigail Mankey. We are on the web at innerviewslive.com and on Facebook at facebook.com/interviewslive. My guest today is Keith Cunningham. While you may not know his name, you have likely heard of Rich Dad from the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Keith is Rich Dad in the sense that the wealth ideas presented in the book are based on a personal finance course that Keith wrote for Kiyosaki. Keith helped to create one of the largest cable TV companies in the United States in the 70s and 80s. In 1983, though, he turned his attention to real estate, building a huge portfolio, but when the bottom fell out just 3 years later, it crushed him financially, as he had personally guaranteed over $100 million in debt. Keith filed for bankruptcy in 1991, got divorced, lost his sense of self-worth, and took 18 months to find himself. He has since amassed a new fortune and now helps others to create and run businesses. Keith is also author of Keys to the Vault, Lessons from the Pros on Raising Money and Igniting Your Business. He has signed 2 copies. Stay tuned to learn how you can win one. Keith, welcome to Interviews.
Thank you, Abigail. Glad to be here.
It's really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
You spent 10 years in the cable industry and you were extremely successful. Why in 1983 did you switch from cable TV to real estate?
You know, one of the things that it's a mistake that I made, and it's a mistake that I see a lot of people make, is I call it the shiny penny syndrome. Right when we get really, really good at what we do, what we know, we tend to get a little bored and we start looking around for something that would add some excitement. And so I had been in the cable television industry for 10 years. We had done very, very well. We were very successful, and I got a little bored. And what I've found in my own life, as well as people that I coach and work with today, is that boredom is one of the causes of self-sabotage. And when you look at people who are really, really good at what they do, who are masters at what they do, you find over and over again that they've been able to manage this tendency to stop doing what they're really good at right when they get really good at it, and it starts coming naturally. So I got bored and started looking around for something that would add some excitement, and real estate was hotter than a pistol at that point. So I said, okay, good. We're gonna start doing real estate.
So give us an idea of how big your portfolio was at its peak.
Well, I mean, I had well over $100 million of real estate. I had well over $100 million of personal liability debt, and that's one of the good things about real estate is that you can borrow a lot of money when times are good. One of the bad things about real estate is that they always require your personal guarantee. And, one of the mistakes that I made looking back is that I didn't value my personal guarantee like I should have. It never dawned on me that real estate values could fall as precipitously and as quickly as they did.
Describe exactly what did happen to your portfolio when the real estate market just crashed.
Well, people, I've heard somebody say one time, history may not repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. And, what's happened recently over the last 2 or 3 years with the economy and the credit markets is not dissimilar to what happened in the late 1980s. Specifically, there was an abundance of easy money. There was an abundance of credit. And when there's an abundance of credit, people start doing stupid things, and they start believing that it's always gone up before, it's going up now. I need to participate in this.
Was that your mindset?
So That's it.
Did you feel invincible?
You know what? I was beyond invincible. I was close to invisible. One of the problems I heard Bill Gates said one time that the problem with success is that it lulls smart people into believing they know what they're doing. And there's a lot of truth to that. I was not only invincible, I started smoking my own exhaust. I started thinking I was really, really good at what I was doing. And the problem was, the market allowed me to feel like I knew what I was doing, and I did know what I was doing. But, when you start letting your ego and emotions run your business and investing decisions, it's usually a prescription for disaster, and that's what happened to me.
Keith, in retrospect, was it something you could have seen coming and done something about?
Absolutely. No question about it. Just like the people who were paying attention over the last 3 or 4 years in this most recent economic debacle, anybody that was paying attention, anybody that was looking at the fundamentals knew that this could not continue. And I'll tell you something. I learned the lesson so well in the 1980s that I started liquidating real estate and assets that were tied to debt in 2006. So a full year or 18 months before this mess started that we're currently dealing with, I was busy battening down the hatches because I said, I've read this book, I've seen this story, I've watched this movie, and this is going to get ugly.
Well, congratulations on learning your lessons from the last go-around. You spent several years trying to pay everyone back, and ultimately you had to file bankruptcy. How did you feel? I mean, that must have been a really cruddy time.
It was the worst. It was the worst possible time of my life. The interesting part is that looking back on it today, it's the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Somebody told me one time that I'm going to have good times, I'm going to have bad times. I'm just not going to know which is which when it's happening. And there's a lot of truth to that. I look at some of the best times of my life, and it turned out those were actually not very good. And some of the worst times of my life turned out to be the best thing that could happen. The problem for me is, I think like a lot of people, and it doesn't matter whether you lose, $100 million or you lose 10,000, when you've lost it all, you've lost it all. You're at bottom. And the problem for me really was that I had my net worth and my self-worth entwined. And so anytime, and this is a lesson I had to learn the hard way, is that anytime you have, your identity connected to something external to yourself, anytime that who you are is dependent upon something in the environment, when the environment changes, which is inevitable. It's inevitable that the environment's going to change. Somebody told me that the only constant is change. And people today who are experiencing a change where they've lost a significant amount or lost everything, I promise you they're going through a process of trying to recalibrate who they are in light of the fact that they've lost, had a loss.
Keith, I know you got divorced during this period. Was the stress of the financial woes just too much for your marriage to handle? Well,
the reality was I was a lousy husband. That's the truth. Certainly, economic stress was added fuel to the fire, but when you boil it down, I didn't do a very good job of being a good husband or a good dad. I look at myself, at that particular time, and one half of me looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger and the other half of me looked like Pee Wee Herman. And, the Arnold Schwarzenegger half is the business half. I had spent 20 years at that point. I was 40 years old when that happened. In 1990, and I'd spent the prior 20 years doing nothing except focusing on how do I become a successful, wealthy, rich business owner, as opposed to how do I become a great father and a great husband and a great human being. So I very much had my thought process was that we were human doings and not human beings, and that's a mistake.
Keith, you took an 18-month sabbatical after your bankruptcy. First off, how could you afford to do that? Just how broke were you at that point?
Well, I was broke. I had lost everything. Texas has some very favorable bankruptcy laws in comparison with a lot of other places. And in Texas, at the time, you could keep your house, you could keep a couple cars. I had prepared for bankruptcy so that I had everything paid off, and it's remarkable how little money it takes to really live when you don't have any debt. And so, I didn't have credit card debt. I didn't have a lot of my big problem was I just owed too much on my real estate. I thought I had real estate that was worth several $100 million, and in reality, it turned out to be worth 25% of that. And so, at one time, I was probably $40 or $50 million upside down. I owed that much more than what the property was worth, and so it reminds me of something I heard W.C. Fields say one time. I sure hope I break even on this deal. I really need the money. and that's kind of the way I felt. So, at the time that happened, I had zero debt. Everything was paid for, and you really don't need very much to live when everything is debt free.
What did you do during those 18 months?
Well, I grew a ponytail. I got my ear pierced. I began a very intense time. I didn't know that it was a sabbatical. I didn't know that it was going to last 18 months. All I knew is that I was in severe pain. The pain at one point was so severe that, and I don't talk about this a lot, but at one point I started looking for a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Really? You considered suicide?
I did. And my world as I knew it had collapsed. The environment, who I thought I was, my identity was totally eradicated, and I had nothing. I had to start over. And the only way I knew to do that was to begin reading some of the masters of either philosophy or psychology or theology. And
who was meaningful to you?
Oh gosh, probably the most meaningful book I've ever read in my life is called A Course in Miracles.
I've heard of this book, so it's interesting because I would say that's sort of an airy-fairy book for like a big macho Texan, right?
You know what? I don't know that it's airy-fairy. For me, it saved my life. If somebody said, is there some theology, some psychology, some philosophy in that book? Yeah, but you know what? The reality is that book gave me a different way of thinking. It gave me a way to reframe my thoughts. And that's really what all of the reading and all the studying and all the meditating and the world's religions, all of the work that I did during that 18 months was simply a mechanism to allow me to reframe my thoughts so that I could get back on top and regain my confidence. Really, that's what that 18 months was about, is regaining my confidence and resetting the dial for Keith.
So how did that book and other things that you read, how did it do that for you? And then what was the reframing?
Well, There's a lot of psychology that says there's a sequence, and the sequence of events that happens to all of us is that an event happens. We give that event meaning. Based on that meaning, some emotion is produced. Based on that emotion, we have some behavior, and as a result of the behavior, there's some consequence. The key to that sequence is getting control of the meaning. What does it really mean? And so the question that I began asking myself is not, how am I going to win this game?
The money game? Life game?
The life game, the money game. Because that was the question I kept asking myself for years and years. For 20 years, I'd ask myself the question, how do I win this game? It turns out that's a pretty sorry question. I'm not going to win this game. The only question, and the question that I began asking myself during the sabbatical, the question I began asking myself was, how am I going to play the second half? Not how do I win the game? I was studying with a guru, a very, very, very wise man, during this time. And this guy looked at me and said probably the singularly most profound thing that I've ever heard in my life. In fact, for the last 20 years, there has not been one day that's gone by that I didn't reconnect with this one thought. And this one thought was this: hell on earth would be to meet the man you could have been. And that one thought has driven me my entire life. In fact, when I talk about it, I literally get chills. And the reason is because I think what most of us are trying to do is to succeed instead of be fulfilled. And to me, there's a significant difference between success and fulfillment has a whole lot to do with how do I become the best me that I possibly can be? How do I stop comparing myself to everybody else and simply become a master at what I know and who I am?
Who was that guru?
His name was Guru Deva. He is a Hindu guru, and he's one of the masters that I studied with over that 18-month time period.
Okay. Keith, we're going to go ahead and take a break, but folks, please stay tuned because after the break, I will let you know how you can win a copy of Keith's book, Keys to the Vault. Welcome back to Interviews. My guest today is Keith Cunningham, who is better known as Rich Dad from Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he is sharing with us his riches to rags to riches tale, true life tale. He has written a book called Keys to the Vault, Lessons from the Pros on Raising Money and Igniting Your Business. And he has been so gracious as to sign 2 copies that we can give away. So if you are interested in winning one of these books, this is what you have to do. You have a choice. You can go on Facebook and you can become a fan if you have not already done so, but you have to become the 500th fan. And the Facebook page is innerviewslive. Alternatively, you can go to Twitter and again, follow Interviews Live and retweet my latest tweet. The winner will be selected randomly from the retweeters. I'll give you that information again right at the end of the show. All right, Keith, back to you. What finally sort of got you out of that 18 months and back into business?
Well, ultimately, it was a matter of healing. It was a matter of getting past the pain, of getting past the shame of making a mistake. One of the things that I did is I lived in the Westlake area of Austin at that time, and I was so afraid that people were going to find out what had happened to me that I decided to confront that head on. I went and stood at the intersection of Mopac and Bee Cave Road from 7 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. I had a little sign and a little tin cup, and the sign said, "Played my cards wrong." And so to me, the things that helped me get past the mistakes that I made was.
Wait, did you really do that?
Absolutely. In fact, I made $20.
Did you?
I did.
Really?
I needed the money too.
Did you run into people that
Absolutely, all day long. My friends are going past me, honking their horn and waving, and they're laughing. And the reality is, the thing that causes. For me, the thing that has caused me the most pain in my life are the things that I resist. And so every time I find myself in a resistance kind of mode, the question is, how do I embrace instead of resist the thing that is pushing on me? And when I do that, it tends to release. And so, it required 18 months. I mean, I did an enormous amount of therapy with a guy here in town that really helped me and did enormous amounts of reading. My job for 18 months was to rebuild Keith. And it finally got to the point where my confidence and my self-worth and my self-esteem was back to the point where I could gingerly tiptoe back into the business world. And one of the things that I knew is that, I had tremendous skills and tools from a business perspective. The problem was I hadn't used them like I should have in my real estate career. So this time around, I said, I'm going to make sure that I pay attention and use my brain and not my glands. One of the things that I believe is true is that business and investing is an intellectual sport. And every time I use my emotions in my gut and my glands in my investing in my businesses, it always winds up being a mistake. So skills and tools and intellect are critical to business and investing.
So how did you actually get started? Like, what was the first thing you did?
Well, I became a turnaround guy. I had done a lot. I'd been a doctor on myself. Unfortunately, the patient died, but I had been. I knew a lot about business. I knew a lot about turnarounds, and I had several opportunities once I finally decided to re-enter the business world, to go in and be the CEO and the president of businesses that were in trouble. And I did the Lee Iacocca scenario, where they paid me $1 a year in salary, but they gave me a pretty good sized chunk of the company. And if the business worked, then we all got well. And if the business didn't work, it cost them $1.
Okay, because I was going to say that seems pretty risky to go with the guy who lost $100 million.
The people that knew me knew that I had just paid a very, very high price for an education. To me, there's nothing wrong with making a mistake. The question is, can you learn from the mistake? Most people that I know bury their mistakes. They don't want anybody to know about them. And as a result of trying to hide the mistake, they never get the lesson. I'm in favor of having 20 years worth of experience, not 1 year's worth of experience 20 times. So the key to me is not whether or not I made a mistake. The key to me is whether or not I make the same mistake more than once. And I guarantee you, I will never, ever make those mistakes again that I made in the 1980s. It was just simply too painful.
Keith, tell us what you're doing now.
Well, today we own, Sandy and I, my wife and I, own a small little handful of businesses. Some of them are local, some of them are not. We successfully rebuilt our net worth.
So what is your net worth?
It's enough so that I don't need to work.
Is it 100 million? Is it more than 100 million?
It's enough so that I don't need to work. It's a great question, but the good news is we're not running for public office, and so the disclosure laws for us are different than if I was running for governor, which I would never do. I don't think I could ever get elected dog catcher. But today we own a collection of businesses. We have a portfolio of investments that we manage. We have a little bit of real estate. A little bit of real estate, which we owe nothing on. We learned that lesson. Real estate, raw land eats 3 meals a day. And so you got to be very careful with real estate. Real estate can be a great investment as long as there isn't too much leverage. And so we're very cautious on that front. In addition to our businesses, we split our time between running our businesses and, about 20 years ago, I got interested in teaching. And about 10 years ago, Sandy and I started creating something called Keys to the Vault, which is a business school for business owners and people who want to be business owners. And we've developed a bunch of a whole different pieces of curriculum that are different courses that I teach, and I teach business owners literally all over the world. So we do a tremendous amount of traveling to Australia and Singapore and Europe and South America. Literally all over the world is where we teach our courses.
We only have about a minute or two. What are like one or two just nuggets of wisdom that you could convey to people who are listening, entrepreneurs, to benefit from what you've learned?
Here are a couple lessons. Emotions, when mixed with unbridled greed, produce economic disasters. How you run your business during good times is the only true predictor of how your business will cope with bad times. Here's one more. A lack of rules and discipline caused every mistake I ever made. Here's one more. All my problems started out as a good idea. And to me, that one is very powerful. That nobody gets up in the morning and tries to run their life with the second or best third ideas that they can come up with. Everybody is using their best thinking. And one of the things that I found for me is that having a coach, having an advisor, having somebody around me to watch me swing is critical, because otherwise I wind up executing on lots of good ideas that ultimately wind up becoming economic disasters.
All right, Keith, thank you so much. Folks, again, want to let you know how you can win one of Keith's books, signed books, Keys to the Vault. On Facebook, become the 500th fan, and you go to Interviews Live on Facebook. Or on Twitter, follow Interviews Live and retweet my latest post. The winner will be selected randomly from among those retweeters. Keith, that is a wonderful story that you shared with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abigail.
That was Keith Cunningham. You can learn more about him and the courses he offers at keystothevault.com. This show is recorded live at Co-op Radio 91.7 FM Austin. Thank you to Lisa Sheps for engineering, Bill Guzik and Jared Hardy for videography, and Mark Goldsmith and Angela Felder for promotions. To stay up to date with interviews, become a fan on Facebook at facebook.com/interviewslive. That's INNER Views Live. To hear past shows, please go to interviewslive.com. You are listening to KOOP Hornsby Austin 91.7 FM. Stay tuned for Reflections of Community Outreach, which is up next.